Welcome, and thanks again for joining us. My talk today is entitled The Nature of Things, which I have to say is pretty ambitious for 20 minutes. It's one of those topics you either expand on for hours or you wrap up in about a word or two. My goal is to be somewhere in the middle toward the shorter end. So far this month, we've spent some time talking about our tendency to see our world in terms of polarities, in terms of opposites or dualities. So today I'd like to share some wisdom teaching that suggests that this way of perceiving ourselves or our world doesn't really capture the truth of the way things are. It doesn't capture the essential nature of things. Further, and this is the good news, our lives are happier and kinder and more genuinely engaged with others when we can part with this illusion. So take a look behind me and you will see a Taijitu, the symbol of the Tao, the Yin and the Yang. I'm going to put one up here actually. Hang on. Okay, there it is. That actually is a picture of what you're looking at behind me. It is our Taijitu belonging to One World. It was up on the stands at the building on Shallowford Road, and we also had it at the Open Mind. So let's take a look at it. What do we see? You see a circle within which are two complementary images, each different and yet each including the energy of the other. Religious historian and scholar Huston Smith tells us that these halves are not opposed, but they are in tension. They balance and complement each other. Looking further, you'll see that they are surrounded by a circle encompassing them both, which is the reconciling wholeness of the Tao or the way. This Taijitu is a symbol of balance and of wholeness achieved by incorporating what we first see as opposites or polarities into the whole. So it's easy to accept that when we're looking at a symbol, we can agree that yes, life is like that. It's full of experiences that we first see as opposites, but perhaps they're not. We can agree that yes, this is the nature of things. However, what happens when then we come up against actual life? Do we remember that truth? Do we accept that a life that is whole includes challenge and ease, sorrow and joy, confidence and fear? Do we understand that awakening to that wholeness requires us to move past easy definitions and false classifications and step back and see the wholeness of things? It's not so easy. However, sages tell us that if we can manage it, we achieve harmony and peace. This is one of the lessons of the Tao Te Ching, the classic work that gave us the philosophy of Taoism. It's a work attributed to the sage Lao Tzu, even though that wasn't his name. In his classic, The World's Religion, Huston Smith writes that the name Lao Tzu translates into old boy or grand old master. It's a designation of respect and affection, but it's not anyone's name. We have no details about his life, except that scholars believe he was born around 604 BCE in eastern China, in the province that is now Henan. He lived a quiet and introspective life. He did not proselytize, and he made no effort to found a religion. Huston Smith calls him a shadowy figure. Legend has it that seeking solitude in his final years, he started out of town on a water buffalo and headed southwest toward what is now Tibet. He was stopped at a mountain pass, and after some conversation, the guard who stopped him realized that this was an exceptional person, and he asked Lao Tzu to record his philosophy before he left civilization and was gone forever. So Lao Tzu stopped there for 3 days, and he ultimately gave the gatekeeper the Tao Te Ching, translated as The Way and Its Power. It's 81 verses. It's a tiny book. It can be read in under 2 hours. Legend has it that he then got back on his water buffalo and was never seen again. Again, this is legend, and we don't know for sure whether it happened or not. I think part of the point of the story is to tell us that the spread of this extraordinary philosophy didn't depend on any concerted effort by Lao Tzu to institutionalize it, to disseminate it. Perhaps it spread because its message rang so true to so many. So what wisdom does the Tao Te Ching teach us, and how does it help us toward wholeness in a world where we are just buffeted by so many competing polarities? In a word, it encourages us to realize and see that there is a natural harmony underlying all things, encompassing all things, and that our highest good comes from living in alignment with this truth. I got to tell you, this philosophy rings so true for me. I remember that when I left more traditional houses of worship, one of the principles that drove me away, or one of the principles perhaps that drove me to, was the search for what I called the harmonic behind all things, the one true note that sings through all creation, that animates and sustains all creation. The Tao calls this the way. As I get older, I think that this true note can be found in more traditional settings, and perhaps I just didn't see it. Perhaps it was a question of what I could see, not so much of what was missing. This is also a lesson of the Tao. So how does this understanding change our lives? The word used by the Tao is effortless, or effortless action, Wu Wei. We continue to act, but the difference is that we do it without meeting resistance or friction, because we are acting in harmony with the way of all things. We are acting in harmony with the way things are. The image used frequently is that of water. It flows without effort, bearing up all that it carries. Think about it. If we are in the river and we are fighting, we are struggling to stay afloat, what happens? We become exhausted and we sink. However, if we surrender, we are borne along with no effort. Verse 8 tells us, the best way to live is to be like water, for water benefits all things and goes against none of them. It provides for all people and even cleanses those places a man is loath to go. In this way, it is just like Tao. One who lives in accordance with nature does not go against the way of things. He moves in harmony with the present moment, always knowing the truth of just what to do. The word used again is effortless, which in our world of working and striving and heavy lifting sounds amazing. I want to know, how can my life become effortless? Where is that door to effortless? The Tao teaches it's right here. Our lives become effortless when we live aligned with the eternal Tao. Simply put, it's the nature of all things. Taoism is a philosophy that rejects absolutes or dichotomies, seeing what we may take to be opposites instead as phases in an eternal rhythm, each necessary for the continued flow. Each flows into the next, connected and continual, and all is one. Listen to verse 2. Everyone recognizes beauty only because of ugliness. Everyone recognizes virtue only because of sin. Life and death are born together, difficult and easy, long and short, high and low. All these exist together. Sound and silence blend as one. Before and after arrive as one. Taoism encourages us to live with the polarities we see, to be comfortable with ambiguities, not to grasp this or that or reject this or that. The Tao terms such behavior grabbing and stuffing, and it leads to suffering. This sounds a great deal like Buddhist philosophy, and in this particular it is. Houston Smith writes that it was Buddhism influenced by Taoism that became Zen. So we see beyond the surface distinctions to the essential truth beneath, that all is one, regardless of outer manifestation or effect. We gain peace when we can hold the tension of the opposites in harmony, realizing they all flow from the one. This is not easy, and I'm not sitting here saying that it's easy. That is a real temptation, because we like clear paths, we like lists of how-to, even on our spiritual journeys. Taoism does not give you that. Today, I am not giving you that. Instead, I am inviting you to open yourself to this wisdom and find out for yourself where it takes you. No Taoist writing, including the Tao Te Ching, gives you a practice or a rule to achieve this wisdom. There is no eightfold path, no 613 mitzvot such as you'll find in Torah, no 10 commandments. In fact, Taoism would reject any such lists or rules as an unnatural distinction and separation of an element of the whole, a carving out of a section of what it calls the uncarved block, which cannot be divided. Grasping at a practice or a rule, even one that's intended to make us more virtuous, more compassionate, more kind, will ultimately devolve into pain as we focus more on the practice or the rule than the universal way that prompted us to adopt it. We must see past the rules, past the practices, to the unnameable truth at the center of all things. With one pointed mind, we keep our vision there. Now, does this mean that we reject all practices, that we just give up our practices? No, it doesn't. But it means that we remember that the practice is not the goal. The menu is not the meal. We use it as a tool to get us to that place where we can recognize the unity of all things. For me, a central takeaway is a way of seeing which impresses itself on our awareness. As we read and consider this wisdom, we raise our heads and look at the world through different eyes. We see truths that speak to us, and we change the way we perceive. We can say, yes, I can see that now. Yes, I remember, when we sit and we consider this wisdom. Our reading today is from the Tao Te Ching, and it reflects this wisdom. I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to invite you to listen to the reading now, and afterwards I'll be back and we'll unpack it together. I want to give many thanks to Muthu Subramaniam for giving us this reading.
Good morning. Tao Te Ching, verse 28. Translated by Jonathan Starr. Hold your male side with your female side. Hold your bright side with your dull side. Hold your high side with your low side. Then you will be able to hold the whole world. When the opposing forces unite within, there comes a power abundant in its giving and unerring in its effect. Flowing through everything, it returns one to the first breath. Guiding everything, it returns one to no limits. Embracing everything, it returns one to the uncarved block. When the block is divided, it becomes something useful, and leaders rule with a few pieces of it. But the sage holds the block complete. Holding all things within himself, he preserves the great unity which cannot be ruled or divided.
Again, many thanks to Muthu for that reading. So let's talk about that for a minute. It was a great articulation of reconciling what we take to be opposites to realize the unity in all things. What did it say? Hold your male side with your female side, your bright with your dull, your high with your low, and you will be able to hold the whole world. Not until you do that will you be able to hold the whole world. Why? Because you will merely be holding parts. Use the energy of one side to hold the other, reconciling both into the whole. Don't grasp this one, rejecting the other. Instead, realize that divine flow encompasses both and all. Remember the Taijitu. Remember the circle encompassing all. When we can make that reach, when we can see that, power is released, abundant in its giving and flowing through everything. It returns to the first breath, the origin of all. In the beginning was the first breath. What do I think of when I hear that? In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the first breath. It returns us to what Lao Tzu calls the uncarved block, which is what? uncut, uncarved, untouched, pure potential containing all. The sage holds the block complete, preserves the great unity which cannot be divided. When I read these verses, they make intuitive sense to me. I read them and I immediately agree. Yes, life encompasses all ambiguities, all polarities, all elements of all things, and is yet beyond them. When I insist on duality, on distinction, I am skimming the surface and turning my face away from that deep truth. I do it anyway. I do it nonetheless, as do we all, because we live in this world and we feel its pull. However, the Tao Te Ching gives us a reminder of what is true, real, and beautiful about ourselves. It gives us a way to see, and it also gives us a way to live with simplicity and openness, the lack of pretension that comes from knowing what is real and what is illusion. It gives us a way of relating to each other, seeing all as arising from the one, just as we do. Now, some may look at this approach and say, no, I can't do this. Some things are right and some things are wrong. And what you're talking about is a world of complete relativism where everything is okay. That is not what is being said here. The exact opposite of that, in fact, is true. If one lives according to the Tao, the divine way, virtue follows. Our own connection to divine flow, if we can call it that, leads us to lives of simplicity, kindness, compassion, and integrity because there is no other option. The path narrows. To take it a step further, rules only become necessary because we have lost touch with this internal guidance. This is what verse 18 teaches. When the greatness of Tao is present, action arises from one's own heart. When the greatness of Tao is absent, action comes from the rules of kindness and justice. Yes, those words are in quotes. If you need rules to be kind and just, if you act virtuous, that is a sure sign that virtue is absent. Thus, we see the great hypocrisy. And it goes on. Only when the family loses its harmony do we hear of dutiful sons. Only when the state is in chaos do we hear of loyal ministers. What is it saying here? It is saying that when we follow the way, human virtue is innate. To quote a different tradition, the kingdom of God is within. So what is the takeaway here? I can't give you a list, a rule, or a practice. Instead, I can tell you that here is this wisdom that will give you a way of seeing that is healing, that is comforting, that is deeply true. If you haven't read the Tao Te Ching, I really encourage you to take an hour or so and do it. The translation I like best is the one by Jonathan Starr, but there are surely others. In this time we live in now, it offers me insight and comfort and courage. We are so lucky in this day and age to have access to such treasures as the Tao Te Ching. Its influence has spread way beyond its geographic or philosophical beginnings. For example, we see its influence in the Christian mystics such as Thomas Merton, who wrote a book on 4th century Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu called The Way of Chuang-Tzu. Now, why would a 20th century Trappist monk devote an entire book to the wisdom of a 4th century Chinese philosopher who was not interested in founding any religion? Why? It's because Merton saw a kindred spirit. He wrote, if St. Augustine could read Plotinus, if St. Thomas could read Aristotle and Averroes, both of them certainly a long way further from Christianity than Chuang-Tzu ever was, and if Teilhard de Chardin could make copious use of Marx and Engels in his synthesis, I think I may be pardoned for consorting with a Chinese recluse who shares the climate and peace of my own kind of solitude and who is my own kind of person. He went on. His philosophical temper is, I believe, profoundly original and sane. It can, of course, be misunderstood, but it is basically simple and direct. It seeks, as does all the greatest philosophical thought, to go immediately to the heart of things. Across culture, language, and time, Merton saw a brother who experienced the world in much the same way he did. In the Tao, Merton recognized a vision reflecting the truth of divine creation, of the world around us. Merton articulated it this way. He wrote, "There is in all visible things a hidden wholeness." There is in all visible things a hidden wholeness. Despite all the teachings on sin and salvation, despite all the rules he was obligated to live by, Merton believed that we are not here to be perfect. We are here to be whole and to rejoice in the truth that we are. We live in a time of such division, such polarization. We line up on one side or the other side of so many divides. How wonderful it is, even just for a time, to remind ourselves that all these polarities are encompassed within one great circle, that the great river flows, bearing us all to the same ocean. Far from removing us from our world, we find a foundation for compassionate, genuine engagement that truly brings our light to others. So I encourage you to explore this wisdom for yourself, and you will see that this brief discussion is only a beginning. So I leave you with verse 25. There is a being wonderful, perfect. It existed before heaven and earth. How quiet it is. How spiritual it is. It stands alone and it does not change. It moves around and around, but does not, on this account, suffer. All life comes from it. It wraps everything with its love as in a garment, and yet it claims no honor. It does not demand to be Lord. I do not know its name, and so I call it Tao, the way, and I rejoice in its power. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I truly encourage you to read this wisdom for yourself. Thanks again so much.